This is not just another story of crime and punishment. This is the haunting, unforgettable journey of a man who was never meant to be free again, yet who never stopped dreaming of it. His name was Samir Awan, or at least that's what the world knew him as. In the dark corners of Lahore, where justice often wears a blindfold of bias and corruption, Samir's name became both a curse and a cause. He was 28 when he was arrested, a wiry young man with stormy eyes and a past that no one fully understood. Born in the slums of Kot Lakhpat, Samir had grown up surrounded by crime, not because he wanted to be part of it, but because he had no choice. His father, a heroin addict, had abandoned the family when Samir was only 9. His mother died of untreated tuberculosis 3 years later. He was raised by the streets, by strangers who traded morals for money. Samir never got to be a boy. Life forced him to be a survivor. At the age of 17, he was already known by local police, not as a criminal, but as a troublemaker. His actual crime? Asking questions. When one of his friends died in police custody, Samir stood outside the station shouting for answers. That act alone sealed his fate. He was now on their radar. By 25, Samir was working as a mechanic, trying to lead an honest life. But one night changed everything. A prominent politician's son was murdered at a private party, shot twice in the chest. Witnesses disappeared, evidence was mishandled, and Samir Awan, who had been nowhere near the scene, was suddenly the prime suspect. No lawyer would touch his case. No media outlet questioned the official story. Within 2 weeks, he was arrested. Within 2 months, sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. There was no proof, only a coerced confession, extracted after 3 days of torture. His fingernails had been pulled out. He could barely walk into court. Still, the judge didn't blink. A poor man's voice had no value. Prison, for Samir, was not a place to be punished. It was a place to be forgotten. The moment those iron doors clanged shut behind him at Lahore Central Jail, he became a ghost in the system. His cell was a crumbling, rat-infested box of filth, barely 6 feet wide. He shared it with 2 other inmates, both serving time for robbery. Water was contaminated, food was often moldy, guards treated them like insects, beatings were common, medical care was non-existent. But perhaps worse than the physical torment was the emotional starvation. For months, Samir didn't speak. Not out of fear, but out of despair. The world outside had erased him. Letters from his only living cousin stopped coming. No one visited. He was truly alone. But there was one thing that prison couldn't chain: his mind. Every night, while others snored or wept, Samir would stare at the ceiling, replaying every moment that led to his arrest. He wasn't thinking about escape. Not yet. He was thinking about truth. How could he make the world hear his side? How could he matter again? The system wanted him broken, but it didn't know the storm it had locked up. This was the man who would later make headlines, not because of the crime he was accused of, but because of what he did next. But before the world knew his name, before whispers of freedom started spreading like wildfire, he was just prisoner number 6,471, living in silence, but plotting in shadows. They say prison doesn't just punish a man, it transforms him. For Samir Awan, it was both a grave and a crucible. Buried alive in a place where hope rarely survives, he found something else: purpose. Lahore Central Jail is infamous, not for its walls or guards, but for the way it kills slowly. The outside world imagines cells and bars. What they don't see is the daily erosion of dignity, the silent screams of inmates who've been forgotten by the system, their families, and even God. Samir's cellmates were 2 seasoned criminals: Jalil, a chain-smoking bank robber who'd lost 3 fingers in a failed heist, and Babar, a twitchy drug mule who talked to himself. They weren't friends, but they weren't threats either. Still, the cell was suffocating. They took turns sleeping on the cracked concrete floor, and when the monsoon rains came, the ceiling leaked over their heads like a ticking reminder of how low they had fallen. The routine was mechanical. Wake up at 5 a.m., roll call, breakfast, stale bread and watery lentils. Then, long hours of pointless labor in the prison's stone yard. The heat in the summer could melt the skin off your bones. In winter, the wind sliced through your ribs. There was no mercy. Not from the guards, not from time. Samir kept to himself. He spoke only when necessary. But he watched everything. He noticed the guards' rotation schedules, the blind spots in the surveillance paths, even which officers could be bribed for small favors. He listened when other inmates whispered about corrupt wardens, drug smuggling, secret tunnels that once existed but had long been filled with concrete. He filed every detail away in his mind, not knowing yet whether they would ever matter. Then something changed. One day, a new inmate arrived, a former schoolteacher named Imran Malik, who had been imprisoned for political dissent. Unlike the others, Imran wasn't afraid to speak the truth. He had fire in his eyes, and he recognized something in Samir that no one else had, a hunger for justice. The two men became unlikely allies. At first, their conversations were cautious, almost coded, but over time, Samir opened up. He told Imran the full story, the arrest, the torture, the sham trial. Imran didn't just listen, he believed him, and he had ideas. Imran encouraged Samir to write, not just for therapy, but as documentation, every detail of what happened to him, every abuse inside prison, every witness who disappeared. It was risky. Guards often search cells for hidden papers, but Samir began writing in secret, using a smuggled pencil and scraps of paper hidden inside an old pillowcase. These writings would later become his weapon, but for now, they were his anchor. Meanwhile, the prison kept testing him. Once, he was falsely accused of starting a fight and thrown into solitary confinement, the pit. 4 days in a dark, windowless room where even your own breath felt like an enemy. No light, no sound, only rats. It was meant to break him. But when he came out, something had shifted. His body was weaker, but his resolve had never been stronger. He had seen what rock bottom looked like, and he wasn't afraid of it anymore. Whispers began spreading through the prison. Samir wasn't just surviving, he was planning. Some said he was going to kill a guard, others said he was digging a tunnel. No one knew the truth, and Samir didn't correct them. Confusion was a shield. Then, in his 3rd year behind bars, Samir overheard something that would change everything. A drunken warden, boasting about a corrupt official who'd taken bribes to silence witnesses in Samir's case. It was the first crack in the wall, not the physical one, but the wall of lies that held him prisoner. For the first time, Samir had leverage. He didn't know exactly how he would use it yet, but a new word had entered his vocabulary. Not escape, but exposure. The prison had tried to bury him, but it was about to make its greatest mistake. It had left him alive. Hope doesn't always come like sunlight through a window. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper in the dark, a single piece of truth in a world built on lies. For Samir Awan, that whisper came in the form of a drunken guard bragging about a bribe, a passing comment, a forgotten name. But to Samir, it was gold. The man the guard mentioned, DSP Wajid Mirza, wasn't just anyone. He was the chief investigator in Samir's case, the very man who signed off on the so-called confession used to convict him. Now, Samir had a thread, and if he could pull it hard enough, maybe the whole system would unravel. Samir shared the information with Imran, his former teacher turned cellmate, who immediately understood its power. "If you can prove this," Imran whispered one night, "you won't need to run. You'll walk out through the front gate." But proof was hard to come by behind bars. Samir didn't have access to phones, records, or journalists. What he had was his mind, and a network of desperate men who owed him favors. Over the last year, Samir had helped countless prisoners write letters, file appeals, and even resolve small disputes. Some of these men had connections on the outside, a cousin who worked in the courts, a brother who was a low-level reporter, or even a neighbor who knew someone in the chief minister's office. Slowly, Samir began to activate those connections. Messages were smuggled out through folded scraps of paper hidden inside soap bars and stitched into clothing sent home for laundry. It was risky. One wrong move and he'd be back in solitary, or worse, declared insane, and transferred to a psychiatric ward. But it was a risk he was willing to take. Meanwhile, the idea of escape had not left him entirely. One evening, while scrubbing the prison courtyard, Samir noticed a weak spot in the southern wall, a rusted drainage grill half covered with dirt. It wasn't big enough for a man to fit through. Not yet. But it was there. A possibility. That night, he didn't sleep. He weighed his options like a chess master staring at the board. On one side, there was exposure, building a legal case, proving corruption, taking down powerful men. On the other side, there was flight, disappearing into the night, becoming a shadow, leaving his name behind but gaining his life back. Both options felt impossible. Both offered a sliver of hope. Then, news arrived that changed the balance. A young journalist from Islamabad named Ariba Khalid had received one of Samir's smuggled letters. She worked for a small online news outlet but had a reputation for chasing buried stories. Within a week, she was digging into Samir's case. Within 2 weeks, she found something shocking. DSP Wajid Mirza had been suspended in another case involving planted evidence and police torture. It was the first real break Samir had seen in years. He didn't cry. He didn't celebrate. He just stood silently in the yard, watching the sky. For once, it didn't feel like a ceiling. It felt like a door. Imran grinned when he heard the news. "Now they're afraid," he said. "And when the system is afraid, it starts making mistakes." Ariba began publishing a series of articles titled The Forgotten Prisoner, each one revealing a new layer of corruption and cover-up. She interviewed Samir's former neighbors, teachers, and even the original defense lawyer who had been forced to drop the case due to threats. Public attention grew. NGOs picked up the case. Protests were held outside the prison gates. And most importantly, the High Court took notice. But power never surrenders quietly. Inside the prison, pressure mounted. Guards searched Samir's cell twice a day. He was moved to a new block without warning. Rumors swirled that he was going to be silenced. Samir knew he had to act, fast. Either the system would give him freedom, or he would take it. And so the plan began, not just to escape, but to survive. Not just to run, but to reveal the truth behind the bars. It was never just about escaping prison. For Samir Awan, it was about escaping invisibility, breaking free not just from bars, but from a system that had erased his name, voice, and humanity. And now, for the first time in years, the world had begun to look his way. But the clock was ticking. After journalist Ariba Khalid exposed the corruption surrounding his arrest and DSP Wajid Mirza's name made headlines, things inside the prison turned darker. Samir was no longer just a prisoner. He had become a threat, not to society, but to those in power. They couldn't afford for him to speak in court. They couldn't risk a retrial that would unravel years of hidden crimes. So the orders were silent, but clear. Destroy him before the truth comes out. Samir received his final warning late one night when 2 guards entered his new cell under the pretext of a surprise inspection. They beat him, methodically, professionally. No bruises on the face, no broken bones, just pain. A message. When they left, Imran whispered, "You can't wait anymore." The very next day, the plan went into motion. A combination of precision, desperation, and sheer nerve. Samir had spent months studying the southern drainage system, where a rusted old grill near the workshop yard had gone unnoticed for years. He knew the exact time when the yard lights flickered and dimmed, a fault in the wiring. He also knew which of the guards could be distracted, and how. With the help of 2 inmates, one a pickpocket, the other a former electrician, Samir staged a small fire in the laundry room. Smoke, panic, and confusion spread fast, just as he'd hoped. While the guards rushed to contain the chaos, Samir made his move. Wearing a stolen maintenance uniform and carrying a bundle of cleaning supplies, he slipped into the corridor unnoticed. He walked with calm confidence, the kind that gets ignored. Down 2 flights of stairs, across the yard, past the storage unit. He reached the drainage grill. It was loose, just like he had planned. A small tool, hidden in his sandal weeks earlier, helped pry it open. Inside was a tunnel barely wide enough to crawl through. Wet, dark, choking with sewage. But it was a way out. He slid inside. 50 meters felt like 50 miles. Every shuffle was a battle against panic and stench. Rats scurried past his face. His lungs burned. His heart hammered like a drum. Then, light. A gap near the outer wall, just big enough. He pushed the metal sheet aside and tumbled into the overgrown bushes behind the prison. He was out, but escape is just the beginning of freedom. Samir ran for 5 hours without stopping, through alleys and farmlands, finally reaching an abandoned poultry shed on the outskirts of Sheikhupura, a safe house arranged by an old cellmate's brother. There, he changed clothes, cleaned up, and made his first phone call, not to a family member, not to a friend, but to Ariba. "I'm out," he said, "but I need the world to know why I ran." And she did exactly that. The news broke within 12 hours. Wrongfully convicted man escapes prison after exposing police corruption. The headline went viral. Social media exploded. Human rights organizations called for protection, not punishment. Samir wasn't just a fugitive. He was a symbol of how deep injustice could run. But not everyone cheered. The police launched a nationwide manhunt. The same corrupt officers who framed him were now trying to hunt him down. But they had a problem. The world was watching now. A week later, backed by journalists and legal activists, Samir walked into the Lahore High Court voluntarily, hands in the air, head held high, cameras flashed, crowds chanted. It was not a surrender, it was a statement. He didn't escape to hide, he escaped to be heard. Freedom, they say, is the sweetest victory. But for Samir Awan, it came with a price. When he walked into the Lahore High Court, surrounded by journalists and human rights lawyers, he wasn't a fugitive anymore. He was a man demanding justice from the very system that had failed him. With trembling hands but unwavering eyes, he submitted a petition for a retrial, armed with evidence, the reports, articles, and testimonies Ariba and her team had collected. It shocked the nation. The judiciary, under mounting public pressure, had no choice but to listen. Within a month, Samir's case was reopened. DSP Wajid Mirza was officially charged with corruption and evidence tampering. 2 key witnesses who had vanished during the original trial came forward, one from Dubai, the other living under a false name in Rawalpindi. Both confirmed what Samir had said all along: he was innocent. And then, after 6 long years, it happened. Samir Awan was formally acquitted. The courtroom erupted in applause. He didn't smile, he didn't cry. He simply stood still, like a man who had just been told the sky was real after a lifetime underground. But the real battle had only just begun. Outside prison, the world had changed. Technology had advanced, old neighborhoods were unrecognizable, and the few people Samir once called family were either gone or strangers now. He had no home, no savings, no degree. Just a name the whole country now knew, some in awe, others in suspicion. He was offered interviews, book deals, even a role in a documentary, but Samir refused most of them. "I don't want to be famous," he said. "I want to build a life." With the help of an NGO that advocated for wrongfully convicted prisoners, he received trauma counseling and basic reintegration support. Ariba, still by his side, helped him get a national ID card again, open a bank account, and even apply for a driver's license. For months, he struggled with nightmares. He flinched at loud sounds. He avoided crowds. There were days when he sat in parks for hours, staring at trees, simply trying to believe that he was free. But freedom wasn't just physical, it was also the power to choose what came next. Samir began working as a legal assistant for a firm that specialized in human rights cases. He didn't have a law degree, but he had something more valuable: lived experience. He reviewed case files of other prisoners who claimed to be innocent. He wrote letters for them, just like Imran once told him to. He visited jails, met inmates, and gave speeches to young law students about how the system could be both a weapon and a shield. And then, one day, he visited the grave of his mother, the woman who had died long before he was ever arrested, but whose memory had kept him alive. He sat beside the stone and whispered, "I'm not broken. I made it." Samir never forgot those who helped him. Imran, who was released 6 months after Samir and now teaches at a low-income school in Gujranwala. Ariba, who went on to win a National Journalism Award for her work on his case. And the 2 inmates who helped spark the fire and plan the escape, both of whom eventually received sentence reductions. As for the prison that tried to erase him, it was now under investigation. Samir's case had opened floodgates. Over a dozen wrongful convictions were being reviewed. Corrupt officials were suspended. Laws were being proposed to ensure that no one else would disappear behind bars without proof. Samir's life today is simple. A 1-bedroom apartment, a job that matters, and peace that he fought for with every ounce of his soul. He doesn't call himself a hero. He doesn't see himself as a victim. He is, in his own words, just a man who refused to die quietly.